Hi, Business Principal students. Today we'll be jumping backwards to Chapter 4 to talk about basic forms of business ownership. Our agenda for today, we'll talk about some of the current trends in business ownership. We'll discuss a few elementary terms and talk about some concepts regarding different types of companies. And then we'll give a couple references for further study for those of you that are actively interested in starting your own business. So, we'll talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages of sole proprietorships. We'll talk about general and limited partnerships, C Corps, S corporations, and the status of limited liability companies. We'll talk about different types of mergers and outline advantages and disadvantages of owning or acquiring a franchise. So, just some basic demographics. I think the latest data this was recorded was in 2022. So, as of that time, there were 33.2 million small businesses in America, which account for 99.9% of all US businesses. Small businesses are credited with just under two-thirds of the new jobs created between 1995 and 2021. And entrepreneurship is currently booming in the US. In 2021 alone, and we know what happened in 2021, there was a record-breaking 5.4 million new business applications filed, and nearly as many filed in 2022. So, how does this break down regarding race and gender? Well, men still own the majority of these small businesses, about 3.5 million of them, while women own a disparate 1.2 million, or about 22%. Almost 800,000 of these small businesses are owned by male and females and have equal ownership. 86% of businesses are still owned by white Americans. This counts for 70.4% of the population. The opposite is true for Black Americans. They own just 2.5% of businesses, um, and despite representing 12.6% of the overall population. That says that from Brookings Institution, these Black American entrepreneurs tend to be sole proprietors, which means that they have businesses that are generally not employing others. So, going through some of the nomenclature, in order for us to proceed in the chapter, there are a couple ground level things that you need to understand. One is the difference between single taxation and double taxation. Single taxation is when taxes, quote unquote, pass through the business onto another entity. This means that there's no tax given up until the point of sale of that product or service. Double taxation is when you pay taxes twice on the same source of income. One example of this would be corporations giving out dividends, and that corporation has already gone through taxation as its entity, and then the dividend portion, the owner or the recipient of the dividend will again pay taxes on that same money. So, what is a pass-through entity? A pass-through entity is a business that moves the income over to the owners of the business and avoids being taxed for corporate taxes. So, why is this important? Depending on your business type, if you're a pass-through entity, then you can save a lot of money from tax implications and having corporate taxes paid back, which means that you'll have more money flowing back to the business. So some types of pass-through entities could possibly be LLC, S corp, partnership, or a sole proprietorship. So let's get down into the different types of companies. A sole proprietorship is generally what you want to start if you're starting small or you're starting by yourself. Sole proprietorship has only a single owner. That person is fully liable for all the activities that happen in the business. You don't have to register a sole proprietorship if you're using your own name. So if I'm John Smith and I start John Smith Company, then I don't have to register it. However, if I go by Trendy Tailor Works, then I need to register that as an assumed name for my company. With a sole proprietorship, since you are the only person and you are doing all the work of the business, it can be hard to differentiate business activities from private activities. And for this reason, sole proprietorships are taxed along with your personal income, and any fringe benefits that you acquire, are also taxable. So if you have health insurance, then this is taxable along with the rest of your income. Some advantages of owning a sole proprietorship. If you want to start small and you're the only person in the company, you have the ability to be your own boss. You can start and stop the business or start and stop work at any hours that you choose. There's pride in owning your own business and retaining the profits that you built. There are no special taxes or additional levels of taxes given to sole proprietorships above the earnings that you make, um, and the regular quarterly sales tax. So some disadvantages are that a sole proprietorship can have unlimited liability. That means if negligence occurs, then the person can go after the business and they can also go after your personal assets. Limited financial resources are usually a problem for sole proprietorships because the person's starting with what they have or what they've made so far in their lifetime. Management difficulties can be difficult since you are managing your personal time, and then the business time, and you may or may not have a full-time job in addition to that. So time management is huge. Not to mention, it can be a very overwhelming commitment, especially if you need to keep the doors open at a physical business and keep the lights on. That will come regardless of how much you work in the month, and how much money you have coming in. Bills need to be paid regularly. So there are a few fringe benefits available to sole proprietorships. You don't have health insurance covered. This is something that you usually have to acquire from a private company, and they tend to be more expensive than government or corporate health insurance benefits. Limited growth can be a problem, specifically if you're a micropreneur, as we talked about in chapter 5. Your income is dependent on you solely and your ability um, to perform to a maximum level at all points in time. So the business growth can be limited to the individual doing the work. Sole proprietorships also can have a limited lifespan. While it's an advantage that you can start and stop the company at any time, you can lose time and assets by having the business stop abruptly, or if anything happens to the sole proprietor, the business simply ceases to exist. All right. Partnership is another type of entity. The owners in a partnership are called partners. This means that there are two or more persons involved in the partnership. Now, a person can doesn't ha necessarily have to be a physical human person. It can be a type of entity, such as a trust or a state, a government agency, or a legal or commercial entity. There's a full list on the right side of this slide, but any combination of two persons, as defined, would constitute a partnership. So, you would define the voting rights and the liabilities in the partnership agreement, and that's something that you would tailor with your attorney. Partnerships must be registered, and if they have want a limited amount of liability, they must register as an LLP, LLP, or sometimes an LLLP. So sorry, you may not be negligible for others in certain acts, or you may or may not be liable for your own negligence. So, if you have a limited liability partnership, this should cover you from personally being exposed to liability that your business incurs. However, if you own something like a medical practice and you are identified as having committed malpractice, then that can still expose you to unlimited liability in certain circumstances and depending on the way you file in certain states. So, but in general, a general partnership or a limited partnership indicates that one person or one of these persons or entities is not active in running the business. Some advantages of a partnership. Obviously, having two entities come together means that they're able to pool and share knowledge and financial resources. The company tends to survive longer because one person or one persons can bow out and the can be taken over by the sole individual, or they can bring in another partner. Again, there are no special taxes on partnerships. Some disadvantages is you may or may not be exposed to unlimited liability depending on how the contract is written and what type of service or industry you are creating your business. The profits will be divided between persons, and there can be disagreements among partners. It's also fairly difficult to terminate a partnership once you've established one. All right. So, a note specifically about LLCs. The LLC and the protection of that company comes via the terms of the operating agreement, which is really why it's really important for you to consult an attorney when you're creating this type of company, especially if you're involving other persons or entities in your business venture. So you can be taxed in a number of different ways. You can be taxed as a single member or a multi-member. So the LLC has the most amount of flexibility from this standpoint. Right, a C Corp. A C Corp is a default corporate type. This is where you have owners, which are called shareholders. So they can be natural persons, means, physical human single person, or legal persons, as we outlined in the slides earlier. So these individuals can have flexible voting rights. You can issue either common stock or preferred stocks or both, depending on their voting rights. And they can have a flexible ownership structure. C Corps are taxed on franchise tax, which owners with function pay income tax on the compensation, and all owners pay income tax on the dividends. However, for C Corps, fringe benefits such as healthcare, 401(k), and so on are not taxed. Um, so that's one benefit. Of course, C Corps have high license and filing fees and extensive paperwork to establish. If you do file a C Corp, there is a government stipulation that you need to convert to an S Corp if you're choosing to convert to an S Corp within the first 180 days of the C Corp's filing. We've already laid out some of the advantages of filing a C corporation. One, you have limited liability. So that means your personal assets are not exposed from the company's activities. So, C Corp, since you have shareholders and you can raise more money by issuing more shares of stock, you're able to raise more money for investment. The size of a C Corp tends to be an advantage as well as its perpetual life. So, since the company is owned by the shareholders, then if the originator or the sole entrepreneur passes, then the company will be able to live on. In that same respect, the ease of ownership is also present in C Corps. You generally have an easier time attracting talented employees because they want to work for a larger, more established company. And separation of ownership from management. is also a benefit of C Corps. So, what are some of the disadvantages? The initial cost of establishing a C Corp is high. There's extensive paperwork involved. Double taxation is present through the taxation of the business and then the taxation of the individuals that are receiving profits through dividends. You have to file two tax returns, the one for the corporation and one for your personal tax return. The size, while it can be an advantage, can also be a disadvantage. The larger corporations get, the more difficult it is to pivot product services and move people or employees in a different direction. It can be difficult to terminate a C Corp. There are lots of rules and regulations around how it can be terminated, around types of exit, who gets paid first in the process of terminating a C Corp. And then, of course, there's always more individuals involved, which means more possible conflict with owners of the company. So, within the first 180 days, if you wanted to convert your C Corp to an S Corp, then you would have to file a C Corp first and then elect the S Corp. It's similarly, the S Corp also has shareholders, but all of these shareholders must be natural persons. It must be single human persons. And they will all have equal voting rights. An S Corp is capped to having 100 shareholders, and that is the limit. So they also have to file additional license and filing fees. And what's different about the S Corp is unlike the C Corp, there is no taxation on dividends. They're taxed on the income tax, and fringe benefits, such as healthcare, are also taxed. So self-employment tax on the individuals that are owners and are also working within the company is limited to a reasonable salary. So only a portion of their income is taxed from that point. So, in summary, sole proprietorship is taxed as a sole proprietorship. And we talked about filing one tax return and having that income in addition to your any other personal or home income will be taxed at the same time. A partnership can only be taxed as a partnership. C Corp can be taxed as a C Corp, and C Corps are subject to double taxation. They are the only entity that is subject to double taxation. The S Corp, it will file as an S Corp, and an LLC, depending on how it is set up and how the operational agreement is written, can be taxable as any type of these entities while still operating as an LLC. With the different forms of ownership, as we talked about, the sole proprietorship has only one owner. It includes unlimited personal liability, which means that your profits are shared with your personal assets and any liabilities are also shared within your person. An LLC will have one or more members and they can have limited liability according to their specific agreement. General partnerships have more than one person and have unlimited personal liability. So the business actions are separate from the individual's assets and they cannot overlap. The C corporation has one or more than one owner, and those owners are also not personally liable. The S corp has between 1 and 100 members and no more than 100 members, and owners are not personally liable. So, you're interested in starting a business. These are some overall statistics derived from the internet that talk about a percentage of businesses that fail. So, it is well known and well repeated that 50% of startups fail within the first 5 years. But what we don't always talk about are the reasons why. So, in the previous chapter, we talked about undercapitalization being one of the main reasons why startups fail. So, according to the statistic, roughly 38% of these startups failing within the first 5 years did so because they ran out of cash. Some of them weren't in the right market or they weren't positioning their product correctly, in order to gain sales. Getting outnumbered. Think about a restaurant pizza joint, and then five other pizza joints move in directly alongside them. This is one example of getting outnumbered where there are just too much competition in their market. Some had a flawed business model or regulatory challenges. I'm sure we can see in the news with all of the political and legal changes that it can make small business operations a lot more difficult. Some faced pricing issues or didn't have the right team. This means that you don't have the individuals to have the knowledge and competencies or work ethic that are needed for your specific company. Product is mistimed. It might have a great product, but the um, consumers aren't ready for it, or possibly they don't understand it. Having a poor product or disharmony among investors. They could have pivoted their business model and then it went south after they decided to go a different direction, or just general burnout. Um, it's showing that 5% just burn out after the first 5 years. Think about a sole proprietor who opens a store, who needs to be open Monday through Saturday from 8 to 5. That can be extremely taxing, especially when you add personal acquaintances, family, friends, or any other obligations. And it can be difficult to perform by yourself over an extended period of time. So, moving forward, a note about mergers and acquisitions. So, you may have heard the term merger or acquisition in the news. A merger is the result of two firms joining together to form one entity. An acquisition is similar to a merger and can sometimes be used interchangeably. But acquisitions are when a parent company assumes the obligations of another company. For example, when Amazon acquired Whole Foods, they purchased the entire company as a whole and brought it under the Amazon name. Acquisitions usually occur when a larger company purchases a smaller company and then all of their processes um, are are overtaken by that parent company. So there are different types of mergers. A horizontal merger occurs when companies are in the same industry and they acquire products or services that are similar to themselves. For example, a soft drink and mineral water are both beverages, so they are along the same industry. A vertical merger is when the company purchases components that are comprised within their company. So we know that sugar or sweetener is a component of the soft drink. So purchasing the sweetener company would be a vertical integration to their parent business. A conglomerate merger is when there are unrelated industries or unrelated products coming together to form one larger company. For example, chips may be complementary to soft drinks, but they're not in the same industry. They're not in the same vertical. So we're talking about food versus beverages, and bringing those two together, while they may complement each other, would constitute a conglomerate merger. Okay, I want to talk about franchises. So, a franchise agreement is where someone with a good idea for a business sells the right to use the business name and to sell the product or service to others in a given territory. The franchisor is the company that develops the product concept and sells the rights to make and sell the product. So, and then the franchise itself is the right to use the specific business's name and to sell its products or services in a given territory. Then the franchisee is the person who buys the franchise. So 1 in 10 businesses in the US is a franchise. Restaurants are generally the most popular form of franchise, but it's not limited to restaurants. Some of the advantages of owning a franchise as opposed to creating your own startup from scratch are that you have corporate assistants, you have management and marketing assistants. You still get to own the franchise. It belongs to you. You purchase it from the franchisor. You instantly have a nationally recognized name. Using our pizza joint, again, as an example, instead of starting our own pizza joint with its own original name from scratch that has no familiarity, we could open a Pizza Hut and instantly have a nationally recognized name, integrated apps, processes, marketing at a national level, and help with operations and startup assistance. So, you definitely get financial advice, and franchises tend to have a lower failure rate than startups overall. So, some disadvantages of franchises is you have to pay a franchise fee, and there are generally a lot of large startup costs in the initial execution. You have to share the profit with the franchisor. This can be some negotiated term, maybe 3% of all your sales go to the franchisor, or some other number that's negotiated depending on the industry and the specific franchise. While there is management assistance, there's also regulation over management. So they may dictate the number of employees that you should have, who can be in managerial roles, the location of your franchise, and other stipulations. Restrictions on selling. So you may not be able to just be done with the franchise and sell it to anyone. They may require you to go through a certain process to offload the franchise onto another. So, with diversity in franchising, women own half of all US companies, but only 32% of franchises. I think this half number comes from either full or partial ownership, and this data may be a little bit skewed. Female franchise ownership has grown roughly 24% in the last decade. So ladies are catching up. Minorities own more than 4 million franchises. So more than 30% overall of franchises are owned by African Americans, Latinos, Asians, and Native Americans. So, to give some examples of high-performing franchises, and I have a list here, but I wanted to go to entrepreneur.com to show you how simple it is to see some just high-level information on franchises. So, it looks like the number one franchise in the United States right now is Taco Bell. You can start up a Taco Bell for as little as $934,000. This may be a smaller or pocket or in-mall type of establishment because when we click on it, we notice that, oh, it can be as much as $4.3 million. Likewise, KFC, Dunkin' Donuts, Pizza Hut are some of the largest franchises in the country. And companies like McDonald's are very popular. However, it doesn't have to be a fast food franchise. You can purchase Anytime Fitness is a franchise, Budget Blinds. Here's Wingstop. Other companies like Planet Fitness and Great Clips are franchises that can be started sometimes for much less in startup fees. So to recap, we have three major forms of business ownership. We discussed a couple others, but sole proprietorship is probably where you want to start if you have a business concept that you'd like to try out. It's owned and managed by you, a single individual. A partnership is a legal entity, and it means that it's owned by two or more people. Corporations are also legal entities with the authority to act, and they have liability apart from its owners, which can be a huge benefit. Here I put some books and some references that I enjoy that you may want to look further into when you're interested in starting your own business. And lastly, as you continue to grow and operate your business, I want to leave you with a quote. Epictetus, upon being asked, "What man is rich?" answered, "He who is content." So, not every startup needs to be a billion-dollar company, right? There are lots of lifestyle businesses or larger multi-franchise owned companies that are very successful that don't make, $1 billion. So, if you're able to functionally operate and sustain and grow the business over time, live within or below your means, and you're content with that, then you're rich. Thank you.